All right, welcome back. You guys will have to excuse the lighting. It might be a little bit darker. It's not as clear as when I go down into the house. I have a lot more lighting, so I'm gonna be darked out a little bit here. But you guys can see the whiteboard, and that's the what we're gonna use today to describe it. I had one question come across about the weight, balance, and placement within my glide baits. Now, I don't have one single glide bait that I make. I build every single lure as an individual lure, so they're all automatically collectors. As soon as you buy them to the point where you carry them on throughout your life, they're one of a kind, so they will always be a collector item to you. Normally, if I make a custom lure, um, your name is actually on the lure, infused into the paint job somehow. But what I do have here is a few of my initial builds that I use as experiments, prototypes, and also some of the lures that I make. Now, I'm going to hold this one up here just for you guys to see, hopefully. Mimicking a shiner, this is a blunt nose, flat-sided glide bait. There are jerk baits, glide baits that come in different sizes. If you watch my previous videos, I explain why I necessarily use the flat-sided variations. The weight placement is a little bit more forgiving because if you use a round dowel type, like a spinner bait or like a prop bait, like the Enola Gay here, being a round profile, if this was a twitch bait or a glide bait, when it comes to the paws, it will have more of a tendency to roll over. Because of the surface area on the sides being rounded, it's going to act just like an airplane fuselage going through the air. And the weight placement with an airplane is try to equalize from front to back because it wants that lift to be able to travel straight through the air. You can think of the same kind of aerodynamics based off of your glide baits or jerk baits. A round object, so if you would think of like a bullet that's flying through the air, it has the bullet coefficient, or the amount of resistance that occurs over the bullet as it's traveling through the air. If you think of it the exact same way, from the point of view of a fishing lure, it's fairly similar. Now, round baits, depending on where the weight is, if it's all in the head, the weight wants to keep continuing the same motion. So if all the weight is up front and you come to a stop, the lure is going to continue to go in the same direction. With a lighter tail, it's just going to be dragged along. When you put the weight all in the tail, the shape of the nose of the lure causes resistance. And eventually it's going to pick one way or another to turn depending on which side of the lure gets more resistance. So with a round lure, it has that bullet coefficient to try to remain straight. But as you come to a slower retrieve, the weight in the back wants to kick around. So I take those same theories into the flat-sided glide baits. This is one of my very first variations here of a glide bait slash rise and dive. So the weight placement on this is not going to be exactly the same as what I have in my twitch baits or glide baits. If you place all the weight directly in the center, let me see if I can draw this out for you guys so I'm not, if you guys can't see it, at least you can see it up here. The standard twitch bait glide bait. If you put all the weight in the center here, it provides a pivot point. Okay? Now, by keeping your weight on the bottom, that keeps the lure from wanting to tilt and turn over when it comes to the end of the glide. So if it starts to turn for whatever reason, if the weight is up too high in the lure, it wants to roll over. The flat-sided lures provide a lot more resistance to actually rolling over. So if you want the bait to simulate a dying fish or a fish that's struggling to stay upright, that's where your weight placement becomes more important. If you put it all directly on the exterior portions of the belly of the lure, you still have the weight that's above that wants to continue to go in motion. But the heaviest portion of the lure will continue the motion faster than what the top can. So when it comes to a stop, it wants to roll. Well, with the weight being on the belly, it'll just kind of coast to the side, and with the additional surface area on the side, it'll stop it from moving to the side. It'll control the roll. Now, with this other variation here, when you do a sink test, you're looking for that most horizontal sink. Okay, now you guys can see where I got my fingers on here. It's fairly in the middle. Okay, so on the sink test, this is going to have a very horizontal, slow sink to it. The weight on this lure is basically right behind the hook placements. Okay, so if you guys can see where the hooks are, these screw eyes are actually drilled through the actual lead. So even though the lead's not in the middle, it still creates a pivot point directly in the middle of the hook placement, so right here. Now, because it's a blunt nose flat side, when this comes to a stop, it's going to want to turn. It just because of the pressure that's on the nose of the lure, being a round nose, blunt nose, it's getting a lot of resistance. So the resistance is more than what is in the tail. The thinner profile of the tail, when it starts to turn, it has less resistance to keep it from turning. So the tail will actually carry around. Now again, if you put all your weight back here to do that, it's getting that pushing motion. Okay, now depending on your weight placement, the first test most guys do is just a vertical floating test to see if it goes straight down and stays horizontal in the water, or how fast it sinks. When I test them, this one happens to be made out of wood. This one is actually made out of hard impact plastic and foam. It's got a skin of smooth on casting plastic, and the inside is actually foam. That's what excuse me. That's actually what keeps the weight down on my lure. So even though they're larger, they're hard plastic, but they're not hollow. So like your Warlocks are solid plastic. The plastic is infused with flotation devices. I make it to where it's a cavity, and then the inside is actually the foam. So there's a harder casing around it. And then that way I can add all kinds of different rattle chambers and so on and so forth. But anyway, the nose shape, the taper of the tail, the thinner the tail is, the easier it is for it to swing around on the turn. The flat side keeps it from rolling over. If you want the lure to do that more of a rolling action, you would place your weight just a little bit higher. Same locations, but you just replace your weight a little bit higher inside of the lure. Okay, so same distance from the center of balance, but you just roll it up a little bit higher into the lure, or you would create a thicker, in this case, a thicker spine of plastic with the belly area more being the styrofoam, or not foam, but the expanding foam. So that plastic itself is weight. Now that's going to be more evenly distributed across the top. So when it comes to a stop, that weight is going to want to tilt or roll over the center of gravity. So when you're designing a lure, it's in steps that you do the process. Depending on if you want a glide bait or a jerk bait, start off with the nose. So let's say that this is the head portion of the lure. This is going to dictate how it actually cuts through the water. The sharper that nose is on there, the easier it is going to travel a farther distance. More blunt nose is going to cause it to get more friction on the front, and then that becomes your pivot point. So if you were to have a bar or a position of where it's getting the most resistance, be a straight line right through the nose. That's your pushing force. When it comes to a stop, that's where the resistance is, so the weight is going to want to either travel around it or through it. The more blunt nose it is, the more it's going to hold back and cause the weight behind it to travel around. If you guys can think of it from this perspective, if you have a truck and you're pulling your bolt, okay, so say this is your bolt. Sorry for the bad drawing here. This is your pivot point, and then this is your truck. Okay. We know that the distribution of weight throughout the trailer will vindicate how unstable the trailer is. If you have all the weight on the tongue, it's very stable. The farther back you work it, the more unstable the lure gets, or excuse me, the trailer gets. The longer the wheelbase of the truck, the more stable it can handle that weight and keep it under control. You're doing the exact same thing basically with a lure. If your fishing boat is the actual lure and your truck is the line, when it comes to the stop, what is the trailer trying to do? If you have all the weight in the front, it will just push against the equally on both sides or straight through the center of the truck forward. If the weight is back over the axle, depending on where it is, high or low, it's going to want to try to travel in a different direction. So if the truck is stopping and the back end comes up because the front goes down with braking, it causes that weight to want to travel in that angle, whatever the trailer is at or whatever plane the boat is sitting at. So if you use that exact same relation to weight distribution, apply that to your lure. Now if your boat has weight just behind and just in front of the axle, it will react the exact same way as if you had all the weight right in the middle. But if you have it low down by the axle, it's going to react almost identical to as if the weight was high and way forward on the boat. Same thing with the fishing lure. So I have one of my prototypes here playing around with the different plastics. This is also a flat-sided hard plastic casing, foam-filled interior with a fixed tail on it. It does have the metal infused into it so you can finally adjust it. And instead of using lead on this lure, some of the waters around us or some of the waters that was selling lures to, fishermen are not allowed to use lures that have lead in them. So on the West Coast and so on and so forth. So I was prototyping lures to try to get them to weight and have a sink rate without using lead. And in this case, I ended up just increasing the amount of plastic and the consistency of the foam. The expanding foams that I use, the mix ratio will either determine if there's more plastic or if there's more air. And you can just play around with those different ratios to come out with a consistency that will match what you want. Now, if you look at this lure, the nose is a little bit more narrow, but it doesn't come to a perfect point, and then it's a somewhat blunt nose, just like I drew here. The weight of this lure is shared throughout the entire lure. It's a little bit thicker on top, just like my drawing here. But if you look at the bottom, hopefully you guys can see this, there's one plug right here where I drilled out, and then that's just solid hard impact plastic. So the weight is actually way behind the lure. But because the weight is more evenly distributed through the plastic of the lure and the blunt nose, this becomes the pivoting point, this line right here. So as this goes through the water, when it reaches the resistance of coming to a stop, the weight wants to continue. And when it has resistance in the middle of the lure, your line tie, that weight wants to travel around it. Okay, so it's going to be to the point where when this comes to a stop, the weight is going to kick the tail left or right. Now, what controls this from actually sinking in a horizontal fashion, it's not the weight, the placement, is the shape of the body. So you can see that the belly is fairly narrow in the head portion. It's fatter towards the tail, wider and flatter, and then you also have the horizontal mounted tail. So when this is cast out and it hits the water, there's less resistance here for the lure to go down. The weight distribution is the same in the plastic, but there's more weight in the tail for the turn. But on the sink, the tail presents resistance from the sink. So when you, as you can see here, my finger is much farther towards the back, or fingers are much farther towards the back. The center is actually towards this hook eye. Now you can alter that balance a little bit by changing the size of the hooks or the length of the shank of the hook. So if you're using number 8 treble hooks, if you use a short shank here and a long shank here, this one's going to be a little bit heavier. So if you miss your sink rate just by a little bit, you can alter it by the weight of the actual hooks. When this sinks horizontally, there's more resistance back here and on the tail. So even though when it's standing still or just being dropped in by hand into the sink tank or the test tank, it will go down to the bottom very slowly, horizontally. But on the swim, it is completely different. Now, depending on the length of the leader, the material of the leader, you can control how erratic this nose will actually turn, because now your leader becomes the front weight. If you're using fluorocarbon that has a little bit more memory to it, that it likes to stay straight, when you come to slacken the line, it doesn't kink. Okay, it's normally a nice radius between your line, the leader, to the lure. So this screw eye, the nose of the lure, is going to want to try to follow that line. With the weight at the back, it's going to kick it around when it gets to the slower portions to where the lure almost comes to a stop. It's going to kick the tail around. Okay, so if it's coming at you, you're retrieving it, and you snap the line, and the line curves this way. The front nose of the lure, even though it's symmetrical, there's going to be more resistance to steer the lure to follow the line. So it's going to want to cant it this way. And then that causes the weight in the back to kick this way. So that gets your side-to-side action. If you're using a solid leader, not wire, but an actual length of wire, the shorter that length of leader is, whether it be shark wire or stainless steel, the more erratic that leader is going to go in the line. So if you're snapping it straight into the boat, each time you snap it, that shorter leader will cant in greater angles, causing your lure to be more erratic. And so instead of that radius, it's going to be a much harder jerk. And the more harder the jerk is from the leader, the more emphasis or energy is put on the weight system to kick the tail around. So in this configuration, you can control the actual side-to-side action just by the leader material, the length of the leader, and the speed of the retrieve. You can have your rod tip in the exact same line of sight to the lure, but how you retrieve the line causes your lure to react totally different. So when I form my lures, the sink test is not the only test that I go by. Okay, normally when I'm making lures, I start out with either the wood or the plastic or foam in a virgin form, and then I do a water test, either a sink test or actually cast it in water and see what it needs. So if I believe it needs more tail action to carry it around, I'll move the weight placement more to the rear. Or if it's to the point where my lure is getting a little bit heavier than I want it to be, I'll just make the nose more blunt, so creating this wall, more resistance to shove it over. Or if I want my glide baits to travel farther, I will reduce the front area of the nose and move the weight more spread out. I'll be adding more to the head portion so that the lure goes in a further distance. This lure here with the more blunt nose, rounded nose, they said the weight is exactly underneath each one of the hook screw eyes. Okay, so it's not exactly center, but it's spread apart so that it acts like it's in the center. With a blunt nose, it slows the lure down in the retrieve. With all the weight being behind this point, it will want to turn. But because I've moved that weight to act like it's all in the middle, it's not going to kick the tail around very hard. Now on this lure, again, I can change the action of the lure, side to side movement, or the strength of the twitch by the leader material. If I want something to be a much less aggressive glide and round off the corners, I'm going to use a fluorocarbon. If I want it to be a very erratic, sharp twitch to where the lure just basically turns in place, I'm going to use a very short, say 3-inch solid leader. On these larger bodied / jerk baits, rise and dives, it took a lot of, I made 3 of these, and I made all 3 of them in completely different weight placement and construction. They all follow the exact same mold. The master mold was made out of wood. The second one was just foam with a hard impact plastic coating on it. And then this one is actually the hard impact plastic with the foam injection on the inside, so it's not hollow. Yeah. All of them use the exact same type of tail, just different shapes and sizes. This one happens to be more of the oval or egg shaped. I have another one that uses the same kind of tail as this one, so it's much greater tail surface area. And then I also use one that uses the flexible tail, so it's the exact same mold as this tail, but instead of having it attached to metal, it has the flexor added into the plastic, so it's very flexible. Even though they're exactly the same shape and they're all within a 1/4 ounce of each other, they all have 3 completely different swimming actions, even if you use the same leader. So if you're trying to find the specific action that you want, having a fixed material like your leader to test your lures, you're taking out some of that question mark as far as what it's actually going to do. If you're creating lures to sell to other people, that's why it's so important, especially for me. By the way, somebody asked how they can actually get in contact with me. If you're on Facebook, my Facebook page is called American Handmade Lures. The The opening photograph or picture on top of the page is a wooden carved bluegill in raw form, just the wood. That's my page. Um, the other ways that you can get in contact with me is only if you're in central Wisconsin. Um, I have the lures that were in the previous video. They're actually, some of them are still up for sale at the Hoffman's Bait and Tackle in Nakusa, Wisconsin. There are my distribution center. And then I didn't wear my jacket that's got my, hold on a second here. Wonder if I got my wallet. My business cards are also located at those locations. If you want to try to line up a lure build, go to the American Handmade Lures Facebook page or call Hoffman's Hobbies or Hoffman's Bait and Tackle in Nakusa, Wisconsin. They have a website. They're another auction type site, so they have multiple different places you can reach them. They will have my business cards there, and they'll give you the information off of them. That includes my phone number. Right now, tomorrow is opening muskie season for our state, and our waters close to my region, they're still high from the snow melt. The water currents are very high, and I haven't even registered my boat. So just with all the different projects I have going on around my home, getting my garages finished and stuff like that, if you have a request for a lure, it's not something I can finish in a week. Okay, I have other priorities that come up. If you're interested in the lures that I have in the previous video, I believe the baby muskie, the one with the small dots, that has been sold. The zebra muskie, the longest solid piece lure that I've made, that is still up for sale. I believe the price on that is $55. Trying to think of what else is there. If you're looking for any of the prop lures, the Quack Attack that I made, the Bearded Dragon is sold. The Quack Attack is still available. I believe that comes in at $50. I have the Enola Gay here right now. I need to do some wet sanding on here and polishing yet before I can add on the hook. This will also be going up for sale at Hoffman's. Again, it's one of the military builds that I would normally donate, but I'm going to be putting this one up for sale. It's just a single large flap tail. Very erratic, very loud in the water. This one would probably be going for about $50 also. There is no name on it, just my company logo on it. I'm trying to think if I have, what else is down there. I have all my Bulldozer series of bucktails and chatterbaits down there. But if you have an idea for a lure that you're trying to either create on your own, or you'd like me to create you something that you can't find in the market, it takes me approximately 2 weeks to cut out whatever shape you want and give me a weight target that you are looking for. Because like I said, between the materials I use, whether it's solid wood, plastic, or the foams, the weight's not necessarily dictated by the size. Some of my 13-inch lures are lighter than some of my 4-inch lures. It depends on the material it's made out of. If you're looking for something to be a collector, like a shelf item, it keeps the cost way down, because then I show more attention to the finish than the actual usage of the lure. But if you want something to be that does both, that you can take out fishing that will catch fish, and also maybe later if you catch a fish with it, say your personal best, and you want to have the lure hanging in its mouth, it can become that mantelpiece that's connected to the replica. So giving me some information as far as the type of equipment that you like to use, the action that you want to have out of the lure, the type of water you're fishing in, because the more dirty the water is, the less buoyant it is. The dirtier the water, the harder it is to get an erratic action out of it. So those are all the details I need to know in order to make a specific lure. And I start out by drawing the lure out on a whiteboard, and it just, because I've done so many lures and so many prototypes, I have a general idea of what it's going to take to make them do it. So if you like using fluorocarbon, I have to change the nose of the lure and the weight placement to give you more erratic action out of the fluorocarbon round travel. If you're using a solid or a more stiffer wire type leader, it changes the way that I actually form the nose. Now, that doesn't say that the actual detail in the lure is any different. It's the curvature or details that I put into the lure. So it's not only the sink rate, it's also the way that it passes through the water and the action that it has in the water. With the previous video that brought up that question, I provided a couple of different examples. Some of your box store variations, they're hollow plastic. If you do a sink rate on them, they're very even, very horizontal. They might more of a more suspension type action. It's the sink rate is so slow. It's the momentum of the lure in the cast when it hits the water. It's just the resistance of the water that determines how deep the lure runs and how heavy your line is and where your rod tip is of determining you can control the depth of it. The Warlocks, they have their weight placement is very similar to this. So it's not directly in the center, it's spread out a little bit. With their pressured plastic infused, they can control which area of the plastic receives more of the air infused molecules into the plastic. So if they pour it or infuse it on the top, more of the solids will settle to the top, and then your air bubbles go to the bottom, and then I'll give you the roll over, or they do it and just vice versa. It's whatever point is where they actually pressurize the plastic. As it is curing, depending on how the consistency of the plastic that's pouring in there with the air, what am I trying to say here? With the air spheres that are infused into the plastic, they can control where that buoyancy composition is within the lure. Some of them don't add them at all. The Navens, your Naven rise and dive baits, you have to add exterior weights to them to get a nosedive because of the nose orientation. That's the body. The nose has the angle just on the front, and then you also have the tailpiece that can be adjusted. If you want a nose heavy sink to it on the end of the cast or at the first portion of the cast, you have to add an exterior weight. Now when you jerk it, obviously the forming of the nose is going to cause it to dive just like a deep diving crankbait. But now on the rise, depending on the surface, so if you're using the Suix, you realize they have a very flat tummy and a very flat backbone. So because of the water resistance on the rise, it causes the lure to do this. It causes it to roll. On the dive, it's just, okay? Think of it like the wings of a fighter jet. Okay, those tail wings can control if the lure turns left, right, if it dives, if it's a straight dive or kilts off to the side. And then the rest of the shape of the body of the lure determines if it rolls over or if on the rise it starts to do this. So for instance, going back to this one here, the belly is very thin, but if you flip over to the back, it's very wide. So on the sink, on the retrieve, it's like an axe blade. Okay, it cuts through the water. It's going to go down. The tail stops the back end from just kicking up and going over the top. Okay, But then when it comes slower and it starts to rise, because this is a very slow rise in dive, the flat back causes it to do this. Okay. Um, so if you have an idea or if you like instruction how to build a lure to fit your preferred action, I can help you out with it if you ask the question on the Facebook page. I check that about once a week. So if I don't get back to you immediately, don't freak out. I only go to the device that has my Facebook on about once every 3 days. And if I miss it, I'll say it might be a week at the end of the week when I see it again. But if you have a design, an idea, just draw it on a piece of paper, the shape that you would like, describe the equipment that you're intending to use, because that will give me an idea of the weight limits that you can handle, that your equipment can handle, the type of water, whether it's a lake, river, water current, or the water quality, the type of fish that are naturally in your waters, and I try to mimic the build out of something that would come out of that natural prey fish. If you have an idea, for example, if you go to the Facebook page, Justin has ordered multiple different custom baits for me, all one of a kind. Excuse me. One of them I made was actually the Grogu, little green dude from the Mandalorian series, and it's a trolling crankbait. But there is no lip, or there is a short lip on the front, but it's actually the ears of the Yoda character that controls the pitch of that lip. So it's either deep diving, or if it's just a wake bait, it's the water that passes over the ears and the adjustable ears that control it. So it's a polycarbonate lip that you can't necessarily bend without heat. You change the angle by changing the angle of the ears, the trailing portion. That is what he was looking for. He wanted something that was a one of a kind. I believe that was a wedding gift to his wife for their wedding. They literally went out the day after, so they're on their honeymoon, and they went out trolling for fish, and he took a little video of the lure being pulled through the water. So that's the type of things that I can't necessarily describe to you guys 100%. But if you have an idea, I will help you walk you through it, because depending on the material, your ability, if you're building something out of wood, you're fixed to whatever the buoyancy is of that wood. So whether it's white cedar, basswood, balsa wood, that's all going to dictate where the weight placement is. I can't just give you one fixed answer to everything. It is a step process to go through to get whatever you're looking for. So that's why the lures that I do have, that I have sold in the past, when you purchase the lure, you got my business card along with it, and you could go to the Facebook page. Up until about a year ago, when I broke one of my previous recording devices, I lost all those previous videos. But I do have them saved on Google Cloud that I can retract back out. If you have that lure and you want to know how it actually worked, I have individual lure or individual videos for each lure. So if you know the name of the lure, or if you got a picture of it, I can pretty much bring up the video 9 times out of 10 and show you. If you ordered a custom lure that's more of a mantelpiece, I know somebody out in Ohio that bought their father-in-law, so she didn't have all the answers as far as like the equipment, the weight and all that stuff. She was giving it to him as an anniversary gift, and she wanted more of a spectacular mounting display piece, but that could also be fished with. So I just had to take a general idea that most fishermen, on the body of water that he was from, that was on, St. Clair. He was fishing Lake St. Clair. So I basically just went and did some research on what individuals are using that body of water. I built the internals and the weight balances based off of those lures, and then I constructed the lure around what the individual requested. So it was a military style lure. This is approximately 6 inches, just under 6 inches. She was requesting something in that 8 to 9 inch zone because that's what the whitefish in St. Clair, that's the average size for those. So I was mimicking the natural prey. The individual, her father-in-law, she was buying it for, had shoulder surgery, so it couldn't be something that was over 3.5, 4, 5, 6 ounces. It couldn't be pounders, obviously. So I made it out of foam, coated it with hard plastic, and then I painted it with his name on it, dates, and then also on the scales. I don't know if you guys probably won't be able to see it here. If I can get the right reflection. The scales I can actually control. Most guys just use netting to put it on there. I dip my netting to the point where it's in silicone, so when it comes back out, I can actually spread those spaces out in the netting to draw out a name, so that when I spray it on there, the scales of the actual paint job are the name of the individual that's buying the lure. So when individuals have come up to me in the past, they're like, "Oh, is this you?" Okay, yeah, that's my insignia. So that's Tinted Lip Fishing. Excuse me, it's upside down. That's Tinted Lip Fishing. But I can tell you who the original owner is. And all I have to do is look at the scales, the paint job, because the name is in the paint job. It's not drawn on with markers. My name, normally, if I put my initials or something on the lure, is normally hidden on the back, in the paint job back here. So that way it keeps people from duplicating my lures, in the exact same fashion. And because I only make one lure of each kind, I've named them. And usually it's either the person that purchased the lure. For the ones that are being sold at the distribution center or the bait shop, there's no names on it. It's just a year that it was produced and by the Tinted Lip Fishing logo. Hopefully that's not more information than what you're looking for. But if you are looking for other individuals to give you guidance, the Engineered Angler, he's another YouTube channel. I believe he's out of the Florida area. He's in a region where he can either do saltwater or freshwater fishing. I believe it's down in the Carolinas, Florida area. He also goes through and shows you different weight placement. Again, if you want to duplicate mass-produced lures, try a prototype first, and then you have to keep everything the same. So even if you're making out of wood, it has to be the exact same wood. Your weight placement is not going to be exactly the same, even from one piece of wood to the next. So there might be small variations in there. If you're looking at another video that I've commented on is Fret Hold Baits. He specializes just in crankbaits. His #1 video, rated video, hundreds of thousands of views already. He takes approximately 40 different samples of crankbaits, whether it be solid body, jointed, or 3-section crankbaits with 5 different lip designs and multiple different weight placements for each one of those designs, and actually does a pool test. So if you're making crankbaits, you can pick specifically what one you want to have, and you can use that to make your own. He did an outstanding job creating that video. But yeah, long story short, it's not one specific answer for everything. Custom lures, if I'm doing something to your requests That's not necessarily my idea, but it's a one of a kind for you. The price at this time is $100 for a standard two-dimensional lure. So something that is just a basic shape cutout with paint or even some epoxy three-dimensional effects in the 6 to 10 inch range, $100. Okay, that's obviously with inflation right now. Epoxy went from $35 to over $85 just for bottles of epoxy. Um, I use multiple different variations of epoxy. I've used True Coat from Joe Peterson in Minnesota. Um, I use a lot of 2-ton epoxy from um, like the standard hardware store. I like that the most. Um, I use the DevCon 2-ton epoxy. I use the bar top coatings. I get good reactions out of all of those. The Smooth On products, they have now 2 different names for their epoxies. And I just seen the most recent advertisement, and what they did is they constructed their epoxies for specific applications. So if you're trying to just put a thin coat on something, you have to buy that variation of their epoxy. If you want a deep coat to make a like a fake flower planter, they have a whole entire different mixture under a different name for that type of epoxy. So I try to stick with the DEFCON 2-ton epoxy. If you want something that's extremely high luster and a very deep multi-layer, I use the Envirotex, which people are going to say that that's not True Coat. The only difference between Envirotex and True Coat is an additive that True Coat is put into their lures to cause it to harden from the inside out. So it's a slow cure, and because of the additive, it provides a UV reflectant into it. But honestly, guys, I've had lures over 20 years that will actually hang in the boat, so when it's in the water throughout the summer, it's being exposed to the light all the time, and I have not had any kind of fading necessarily happen. My first initial lures, that wasn't the case because I used the 5-minute epoxies that will actually yellow. Those do not have any kind of UV inhibitor or blocker in the epoxies. So they yellow over time, and they also allow the light to go through and affect the base coats. I use water-based folk art paint. For some details into them, I will use enamels. This one is one of my personal lures. It's been munched on multiple different times, and it sits outside, in my garage, right by the window, basically, and it hasn't faded whatsoever, and nothing's broke. So if you're looking for three-dimensional carvings or the additional texture, see if I can get, if you want the scale field texture so it's not just smooth, that's an additional $20 because that requires 3 layers of epoxy in order to do that. You have your base coat epoxy that's much thicker, that holds the netting up. You have the coat of epoxy that actually holds the netting to the lure, and then a very, very thinned out coat of epoxy to seal in any kind of little fibers that might be sticking up from the mesh. If you want a lure that's completely carved out and has the detail carved into the lure, I'm not doing that right now because it takes me months to do that. I can do my military builds in approximately a month to 2 months. For those of you that don't know my military builds, you'll find that on the American Handmade Lures. I can't remember if there's any videos on here showing my military builds. but those are all for auctions. And usually the individuals that win or get the lures in auction, they'll roll it over from year to year to year for their nonprofit organization. Uh, Most recent group of lures that I gave to a muskie club, they have now um, accepted over $10,000 for 4 lures. $10,000 towards the Muskies Incorporated group, or it's the um, Winnebago Muskie Club out of eastern Wisconsin on Lake Winnebago. Um, I donated them to the organization, and they just keep raffling off and auctioning off. And each time the winner then turns it back in the following year to be auctioned off again. They have now, in 5 years, they've collected over $10,000 in fundraising just from those 4 lures. So, um, well, my lures might cost a little more than some. If you are in the bass fishing world, or if you're in the southeast with bass fishing lures that are $250 to $400, I can duplicate any one of those lures for approximately $100. Okay, um, I can see the picture. I know exactly what it takes to make the lures swim the way they do, but it takes me a little bit longer time. And like I said, on those, it takes me approximately a month just to cut them out, um, depending on how detailed the paint scales are. Another week. The epoxy takes a week by itself. Each layer is 24 hours, so you can add it up. If you want 3, 4, 5, 6 layers, it's a day for each layer. For each layer of epoxy is an additional $15. That's to cover the material of the epoxy, um, my abilities to manipulate the epoxies the way that you need it to be, and also my rotation device that runs on electrical current. So $15 covers that. Like I said, epoxies have gone up from $35 to over $80. Okay, it costs quite a bit more. Before, I only charged $5 per every layer of epoxy. Again, the very, very detailed lures. Sorry, I don't have the time right now. Like I said, tomorrow is opening weekend for fishing here. Um, and I'm in one of my finished garages. This is just my storage seasonal garage. I have 2 other garages that I'm behind schedule on finishing. So I got to get them covered up now that we have a little bit more decent weather. So hopefully that answers the question. For weight placement, it's different for every different one. If you have a specific idea or a specific material and swim action that you want, go to the American Handmade Lures Facebook page. Bring my attention to it, ask it, post it, whatever, or just comment on one of the videos there, and then we can go from there, either through private messaging or I'll give you my phone number or whatever. We'll go from there, and then we negotiate costs there. Like I said, most of my lures are under $150. If you're looking for something to raffle off and you really want something specific for a group that you will intend on using for raising money for your organization, again, we can negotiate that out. All this stuff takes time. I'm a mechanical engineer, or at least I went to school for mechanical engineering. I'm in the automotive engineering lifestyle, I guess if you want to call it. So this stuff is very evident to me because this is the same kind of stuff that we use in our race cars. The weight placement, center of gravity for launching, for control around corners. It's the exact same idea. I'm also a pilot, so I know how the air traveling over wings and over fuselages, how that works out. My lures might seem expensive for my region. Lee lures are normally anywhere from $80 to $150, and they're very plain Jane wooden lures, mass produced. Bass lures in the southeast are going up of over $500 now. I'm realistic. I'm not in it to make a ton of money. I want to pay for the materials and my time into the lure, and that's it. And then I show pride that an individual that buys the lure can carry on that thing. So anybody that sees my logo or does any kind of research or joins the American Handmade Lures, you'll learn something. So with that, have a good one. Join American Handmade Lures. Again, this channel is not monetized, so I don't make any money from YouTube on it. The Facebook group, I don't make any money on it. I'm there more to get individuals to build their own lures or give them examples of what I've done to either lures or fishing rods. The most recent things are about fly fishing rods. Some of these videos I share onto that page. Other individuals in the past have shared stuff into that page. It was the Facebook group was in hiatus for the last 2 years approximately with all the Zuckerberg stuff that was going on Facebook. I had a page on Parler, but that was taken down again 2 years ago, so I lost all those videos. So the best way to do it is just to go to the Facebook page or contact Hoffman's Bait and Tackle in New Coosa, Wisconsin, and they will read you off the information on my business card. I'm not going to share my phone number here. And then that way it shows that you're actually interested in getting something done, either buying a lure or you need direction for it. You can comment on this video. Again, this is one of my devices I don't check very often. So this is the Inspector Business YouTube channel. I have 5 other YouTube channels that I use primarily. So this one is this is the oldest one that never took off. The other 4 or other 5 YouTube channels kicked off right away, and now they're starting to kind of like mediocre out. So with that, have a good one.